Welcome to episode 13 of the Welcome Home podcast, where we talk about the transformation from troops and boots to veterans in the civilian world. I'm Andy Weins, joined as always by my compatriot, fellow battle buddy, Dylan Sessler. Dylan, what are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about probably one of the most probably well-known things about veterans, and that is veteran suicide.
All right, well, let's get into it. It's an absolutely necessary topic, something that we've both dealt with, worked through in our personal lives. You've been very open and honest and vulnerable on this podcast with the struggles you've gone through and your own personal history and also the history with your father. So it's an absolutely worthy topic. It's certainly something that's taboo for most, and yet in the veteran community, it's important that we talk about it. And that's it. I'll leave it at that. It's important we talk about. So I appreciate you being vulnerable and wanting to talk about that today. So let's get into it.
Well, first I want to read something from a report from Psychology Today that I think is kind of valuable context for the veteran community.
Mm-hmm.
So the report was done by Thomas Suett of Boston University. Suicide rates among the United States public have been increasing for the past 20 years, but among active military personnel and veterans of the post 9/11 wars, the suicide rate is even higher, outpacing average Americans. This paper estimates just over 30,000 active duty personnel and veterans of the post 9/11 wars have died by suicide, significantly more than the 7,000 service members killed in the 9/11 war operations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's absolutely massive to see that suicide is, what is that, like more than 4 times the amount of deaths by suicide than actually killed in combat. So it's obviously, it's a massive topic, and one that is, you're more likely to die by suicide than you are to die in combat if you join the military, which is interesting in this day and age.
Yeah, and whenever I see stats like that, it's correlation versus causation, right? Is it those that join the military are more prone to suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, those tendencies, or is it truly a cause from service? And not a rhetorical question. It's something I've often thought about. I talk about this in my book, and one of the chapters I write is, "But did you die?" Right? It's humorous to us because it's like, well, but you didn't die, and then it's like we face death. We're willing to, right? Before we even know what it means to be a soldier, you stand there with you raise your right hand on the red carpet, and you say you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution, right? And you write that blank check, and so it's like death is something you've accepted, and like at 18, 19 years old, you have a will. Like most 18, 19-year-olds don't have a will or considered it. And so is it that we are more risk averse or adrenaline junkies or in the cadence that we call and the way that we're trained, we've learned to accept death and talk about it. Like, that's something I've often struggled. So I can say I struggled with depression and suicide way before I joined the military. Mm-hmm. And is that why I was more open to joining in the first place? For me, I'd say, yeah, probably. Yeah. Right? I joked at the time with my battle buddies, like, yeah, we're going to go to war and we're going to die or kill, and that's the plan. And how ignorant of a statement was that? And yet that was my thought. Like, when we got home, it was like, oh shit, now we're home. Well, that wasn't the plan. Now what? Right? Because we've had this acceptance that, okay, death is a viable way out. It's like, there's no, I have a tattoo on my arm, right? John 13:15, or 15:13 rather, right? No greater love than for you to lay down for your life for your brothers. And it's like, that was in a lot of ways kind of like suicide, the easy way out, right? It was simpler. It was simpler to say, yeah, I did the thing and I died for a good reason, versus, oh, I have to live and figure out what life is all about when I'm not sure about myself or others.
I think that's probably a lot more relatable than most people would admit to. It was certainly relatable to me in terms of what you said about uh, I get home expecting I was expecting to die overseas, and then I get home and now what do I do? Right? Like
Yeah.
uh, I guess I wasn't prepared for the follow up of life after a deployment, right? Like I think that's a lot more common than we let it we lead on to. I think a lot
Hmm.
of veterans actually go overseas kind of having that expectation or that thought or just so well prepared for death that you come home and that's the shock is you come home, right? Like I wasn't expecting to come home and here I am. And that to explore, like I've kind of always theorized, like everything you said, it was kind of all of the above, right? Like I think one, veterans, I should say people that join the military tend to probably have more trauma and more insecurity, more mental health issues prior to joining than most people. That's a guess, right? That there, I wouldn't say there's any hard evidence to that, but that's just a guess from what I've seen. And then the military itself actually creates the opportunity and the culture that can make that worse. Sometimes make it better, but also in other ways make it very much worse because of how rigid and like the just how set against any kind of weakness the military can be, right? Like if you show any kind of weakness, there can be a dramatic dramatic response or an abhorrence to it. Like how dare you be weak? Like you're going to let down the team, and that can be a remarkably toxic piece of the culture that I think absolutely then can kind of force people to turn problems in on themselves rather than allow discussion and discourse on, hey, what do I do here? So I think culture has a big impact and has had a big impact, and we haven't really. I think we've dug into it in the recent years, but a little too late.
Yeah, here. So Google, right? That's the we have the most of the world's knowledge at our fingertips, and so I Googled that question, and this is the answer I'm getting, and this is through I want to make sure I cite this the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine. This is what they said: combats are not more likely to have suicidal ideation, often associated with PTSD and depression, but they are more likely to act on a suicidal plan. I've never read that before.
Hmm.
And also it says, especially since veterans may be less likely to seek help from a mental health professional, non-mental health physicians are in key positions to screen for PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation in these patients. Okay, so according to the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine, right, that actually goes with what you say. Veterans are doers. We get stuff done. We you see a task, you execute, right? That's one of our greatest strengths. It's one of the reasons why people want to hire us, because we're action-oriented individuals. We're not academics that theorize. We are action-oriented people. And here it says, especially since veterans are less likely to seek help in the form of mental health, because, and that is true. The military, since I've joined, coming on 19 years now, in the early 2000s, like suicide was a thing, kind of talked about it. It wasn't until probably 10 years ago that it was like, okay, hey, when you talk about this, it's not going to negatively impact your SF-86. That's your clearance for. I think that's used across all branches. I know we use that in the military, SF-86. That's your application to get your security clearance. And for the longest time, if you had gone to mental health, you would get flagged, and then you could lose your security clearance. That was a no shit, real deal reason why you didn't go seek mental health. On top of the stigmas, on top of the alpha male syndrome, right? So that's interesting. Like, so, here 3 minutes ago, my theory was, oh, veterans are more likely than the average population. And like, according to this, no. No. And this study came out, pulled up here. This was February 2012. So a little dated material, no doubt. Retrieved May of 14. All right, so this came out in 12. So that's interesting that it's more likely because we're more likely to act on it, right? So the percentage um, uh, of us that have ideations is the same as the average um, civilian, for lack of term or lack of term. It was the likelihood to act on the plan, and that actually sparks something for me too. It's like I made a point years ago, 15 years ago, when I got back from Iraq, to do my annual physicals. I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this thing, right? If I do nothing else, I'm going to go to the VA once a year and have them check my cholesterol, my blood pressure, right? I'm not going to do anything else. And so I've been very religious about it. For years, it was always in January, and now I skipped it or whatever, pushed it. Now it's in April every year. And every year I talk to my doctor, and they ask me the same questions, and I can track my own personal progress with the VA, or also I do my PHA, my periodic health exam, with the Army, and every year I kind of track, well, how do I feel, right, when it talks about depression and suicidal ideations. And at the VA, it's like, hey, have you thought about suicide in the last 30 days? Yes. Have you come up with a plan? No. Right? And that's pretty significant, because at one point the answer was yes. Mm-hmm. And here is my plan. And again, there was old thing, my dad used to say this to me, that when his grandma told him this, right, there was like, if someone talks about suicide, it means they're not serious because they're talking themselves out of it. And it's like, well, that ain't great math, right? And often it's a cry for help. Yeah. And also, people that want to commit suicide, it's very difficult to stop them. That's it. It is. They're going to. The goal is, how do you prevent them from wanting to do it?
Right. My work is centered around talking to people who are actively trying to change, mostly suicide, right? Like the conversation typically starts with, this is I want to commit suicide, and here's what do I do? I don't know what to do. And then we dig deeper. We dig into the core issues, because realistically, suicide isn't the problem, right? It's the result of the problem. It's a culmination of everything that's happened to you, and that overwhelming sense comes over you that you don't know what to do, right? So suicide isn't the problem. It's the result. And so if you have never grown up trying to work the problem, which is everything else, you get very much hyper-focused on this idea that if I'm not here, it's better for other people, or it's better for myself. And so there's what I've understood about people is the people that want to end their life, they don't talk to anybody about it. They don't. What will happen is you will see very, very difficult to spot behavior, things like, saying goodbye, but it feels different, right? Having conversations, but the conversation just feels different, right? It feels weird, right? It feels like this is the last time you're going to see this person. But the people that don't want to come back, the people that want to end their life, they don't find help. They don't go searching for help. They go searching specifically to break ties, to break connections, because any connection makes that commitment to ending their life even harder, typically. And so the people that come see me, they don't want to die, right? They may feel like they are locked on the idea of suicide, but there's a part of them that says, I don't want to die. I just don't want to live like this. I don't want to think like this. I don't want to operate like this. And that's where we go, is we dig into those problems, right? The real problems, not the suicide problem. We dig into the problems that started it, right? Like for me, I see people as, you start off as one human being, right? You are you when you are born, right? And you come out, and then all of a sudden something happens. Somewhere between 0 and 10 years old, a person faces a social situation. It's between them and at least one other person, potentially more, where they realize that the person they want to be, as you know, as a kid, cannot exist in that social situation. And so you separate, right? You go two ways, right? The person inside is you, but you have to suppress it. You can't be that person. The person outside is the person that fits the social situation, typically the family. And that's where people go wrong, right? When you can't express the person within, that becomes a very problematic scenario, because that's where all your problems are, right? The way you actually want to express yourself, the way you want to talk about life, the way you want to deal with problems is the person within. The way you have to deal with everything is the person outside. And so you're masking this whole person that is realistically more interconnected with your body than the person on the outside, right? So that you might have to do this with your family, you might have to do this with your friends, school, work. You might have to do this literally everywhere. But if you can't connect with the person that is within you, the person that has real, tangible feelings and physical feelings, most of all, and you can't regulate them, you can't express them, you can't learn to have a discussion about them, those are the deep problems, right? It isn't about you got in a car, you got a car accident, or you got into a fight with your mother or something like that. It's deeper than that. And people forget that it goes back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years sometimes. Yeah, I mean, it's suicide isn't the problem. It's just the result that becomes the end game of all the problems.
Yeah, the one thing I've been working on myself, I read the book, actually I have it right here in front of me. Kind of sits here, I reflect back and from time to time. It's called The Mountain Is You. And it's Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. Brianna Weist, similar last name to me, but I before E. And anyways, I read this book and it was heavy. This took me a month. I was on a kick there, reading books where I was reading a new book every 3 or 4 days, and that one took me 3 or 4 weeks. I think even more. I started in January. I don't think that I finished until like mid late February, because it was like 5-6 pages, gave me hours of material to think about. And it was this, and also work with another counselor that I've been talking to for a number of years. She's a friend of mine, and we peel back some layers from time to time. And she finds me fascinating because she says you open up more than most, and especially for a man, because she primarily works with women and that have gone through trauma. And she's like, you're like the one male client I have. I'm not really client, but whatever. And so she's the one that gave me this nugget of truth, this idea of the wounded child inside you. And then I read this book from Brianna Weist of Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. And I realized that the times that I was most suicidal, most hurt, most offended, whatever, it wasn't what other people did or said. It was the fact that what they did or said attacked the child inside me that thought I wasn't good enough. And I didn't realize until recently that not everybody has that child inside of them, right? Everyone has a wounded child, and everyone else's wounded child is something different. And really that is it, is this the idea that I'm not good enough. And so this goes back to being a teenager when I was a fuck, right? I also read I heard, I think it was this weekend, I think it was this weekend, watched a video and it was talking about the psychology of why young boys are assholes from the age of 13 to 24. That was a specific age. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I need to watch this, because I was an asshole pretty much from 13 to 24. And I thought, oh no, I was rebellious and I did this, and then I moved out of my house, and then I joined the army and I kind of found my own way. And 23 is when I got home from Iraq at 23, and then I toured the country with the band. And literally it was like I turned 24 in March. I started working for my dad in April. I bought a house in August, and I was like, oh, this all kind of makes sense, right? And it was like, oh, this is just my life. No. Actually, what it comes down to is, from a biological standpoint, men and women, but men more, at the age of 13, when they're hitting puberty, it was going back to us as humans. It was at 13 when you start reproducing, you had to leave your village. If you were in a village of 150 people, you had to get out of the village. There wasn't crossbreeding. That's what it was. That's why at 13, right around the age of 13, we have this circuit that goes off, and we can't be more disagreeable with our parents if we tried. It's like we'll listen to our aunts and uncles, we'll listen to some teachers. The last thing we will listen to is our parents. And what it did is, as when we were more hunter-gatherers, it forced young men and women to go to other tribes, and then they would breed, and then eventually they may or may not make it back to their own tribe. And that's it. And then I think, oh, wow, well, let me think, where was I at 13? What, 13, I was pissed off at the world, and I was the smallest kid growing up, so I got picked on, and I was never going to beat my dad at anything, and so I was never good enough for him, and I wasn't good enough for school, and I wasn't good enough for the bullies. And it's like, okay, well, and I wasn't good enough for the teachers because I was smart enough and I was capable enough, and I didn't want to be in school at the same time because it didn't challenge me in the ways that I wanted to be challenged. And I joined the Army, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to adhere to somebody else's standards. And it's like, well, fuck their standards. I don't care about the Army standard. I'm going to, if I pass PT test, I pass PT test, or whatever the thing is, And then I got into corporate America, and it was like, well, it's like I do things my way, and people don't like it. Well, they can go fuck themselves, right? And then I got in relationships with women, and it's like, well, no matter what I do, it's never going to be good enough for her because she's never going to be happy. And well, fuck, Andy, it's you. Like that's what I had, this realization, and then and now I can own it. In some ways, no, Andy, you are good enough. You figured it out. You're good enough. You've done this and proved that you are good enough. Or right, and then the flip side is, no, you're not good enough, and this is what you need to work on to be good enough for this thing. Right? You want to make the money, you got to do this. You want to win the award, you got to do that. It's like, okay, well, I'm okay. At least it's now clear and concise. Instead of Andy's never good enough, it's like, no, here's where you are good enough, and maybe the people aren't good enough for you. Right? I heard something recently and it stuck with me. I think I may have said this on the podcast before. I'll say it again, right? You can't change the people around you, and you can change the people around you. Right. That's really struck with me. I have come and gone out of people's lives, and I think, well, that's because I'm pretty open and honest, and not so many people like that, and some other people, they might like it, and yet it's a lot. It's too much, and I've been told it all my life. It's a lot. It's too much. And it's like, okay, well, I'm good with that. I would rather be too much for one than not enough for someone else. Like that's, and you know what? So that's good enough for me. And if it too much for someone is not what they want, well, that's a them problem. And I've learned that it's okay to say, you know what? That's a you problem. My job in this world is not to outwork other people's problems. My job is not to outwork their insecurities. My job is to outwork my insecurities. Mm-hmm. My job is to understand how do I self-sabotage? And how do I take those parts and pieces of me, which are the best parts and pieces of me, that can manifest as the worst parts of me, how do I understand that and master that so that the best parts of me show up every day? And that's on me to figure out. And that's exciting.
It is. And it's, oh, man, there's a lot to say here. I mean, one, good for you. I mean, to be able to look at yourself and protect yourself in that way. I don't think people really understand how hard that is if you've never been taught it as a kid. And I think kids just don't learn that very easily anymore. And so
learn what exactly?
To be able to protect their identity.
To
say, if this person doesn't like me, maybe that's not necessarily my problem, right? Because kids want to please. They want to make adults, kids, everyone happy around them. And when they're not, what happens is they stop protecting themselves. And so go ahead.
I was gonna say, or what I've seen, and this happens with adolescents and even adults. It's like they put all their energy towards convincing some people that they're good enough when there was already a crowd of people that accepted them from day one. It's like it's like that loss bias. Jordan Peterson talks about that. It's a 5-to-1 ratio. Mm-hmm. Right. Like if one person doesn't like you, that's going to hurt more than if one person likes you. You need 5 people to accept you to negate the one person that doesn't accept you. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, what's simpler, converting one person to like you or embrace the 5 that already do? It's like, well, it's like we're constantly chasing, right? It's that, and I own a business, and in sales, like it's like, oh, the people that the people that are hard to sell to. And it's like, well, even as humans and as adults, we do this. It's like, well, then why are you chasing the people that will never buy from you?
Right.
Right. And it's a sometimes always never principle. And in my life, I've realized I fucking love numbers. I break things down in three, and the math overall in the grand scheme of life is almost everything is in 1/3. If I say something, if I do something, there's going to be always people that accept it. There's going to be the sometimes people that will sometimes accept it, and there's going to be the never people that will never accept it. Mm-hmm. And the challenge that I had a lot growing up was I put all my energy into the never people. Mm-hmm. I dismissed the people that always accepted me because I took them for granted. I didn't focus on the sometimes people because it was like, maybe, maybe not, whatever, we'll shake the dice. I focused on the never people because I had it in me so hard that I had to convert them. I had to convince them that my way was better, that my ideology, that my values and my beliefs were good enough. And it's like, once I took a step back and started watching people and how they responded to me or lack thereof, it's like, everyone's got that friend that, if you stop texting them, you'll probably never talk to them again. Well, why don't you start there? I did that back. I remember right before, it was interesting, right? So my history growing up, so went to Catholic grade school, 22 kids graduated in 8th grade. And then I went to the high school, which was like 450, 500 kids. And our high school was going through like growth spurt, whatever. So you did 8th and 9th grade at North Junior High. So your freshman year really wasn't your freshman year. You went from being the top dog 8th grade to being kind of the top dog again in 9th grade. And my issue was I went from 22 kids in my class to now a class of 450. And there was only like 5 or 6 of us that came from the original school, and the other ones all like played sports or knew people from intramurals or something, and I knew nobody. So of course, who was I friends with? Well, I was friends with whoever would accept me, right? And then my sophomore year, I went to the big high school, and then my sister was a senior and I was a sophomore. So then she picked on me, and all her friends picked on me, and I was still 5'2", 5'4", whatever I was, but yet 100 pounds going in my right. And now like there's like man-sized kids, like 17, 18-year-olds, and I'm this fucking puny, smart-mouth 14-year-old, 15, 14, what are you, 15 sophomore year? And it's like, well, that, so I learned to run my mouth. And then junior year, between sophomore and junior year, I shot up to 6 foot tall, and I started, kind of getting some friends and like kind of being cool. I worked at the gas station. I might have sold some cigarettes to underage cool kids, no big deal, right? Like, so I found my place in this world, right? I was. And by junior year prom, I was on the prom court. It's like, well, that was okay. There's some evolution there. And then I remember senior year, all of a sudden, like I had friends and I had a social life. And then I also started realizing then it was like, well, hold on. Like, then it was like, I went from wanting some friends to by senior year, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be cool. I'm going to be like, whatever. I'm going to fit in and like make it happen. And I remember right before Christmas break, I don't know why I did this. I just felt the need to like kind of shut down because I was always kind of the class clown. And then I was like, well, what happens if I shut down? What if I stop telling jokes? Will people still laugh? Will people still talk to me? Will people still reciprocate? And when I realized with that exercise, it was like 3 days, whatever, 4 days, whatever, the couple days before Christmas break, I just shut down. I kind of like got introverted for a bit there because I felt like I was always projecting and always trying to prove myself. And I was like, I don't have to prove myself to shit. And it was interesting. There was only a handful of people that talked to me that week at school. And I can almost tell you who they are by name because they were the people that had always accepted me. And they weren't like my best friends by no means. They were the people that understood me. Mm-hmm. And now looking back at it, like when I think about people that I know I can trust, it was like those people. And these are people I haven't talked to in 20 years. Right? One of them, I know her name's Susan Winkleman. Like, we always had kind of class together. She was cool and preppy and all those things and all the things I wasn't. And I remember she understood me though. And she went out of her way to befriend me when I didn't have a lot of friends. And then she went out of her way to be nice to me when I was more introspective. And it's like, man, that was the good stuff. And it's like, why is it I spent so much time and energy focusing on the people that didn't accept me, doubling down on this idea that I wasn't good enough when I had people right in front of me then and there that did view me as good enough. And I still do it to this day. There's still to this day that I got out of a long-term relationship recently where it's like I put a lot of energy into somebody and her family and her friends, where at the end of the day, because of her wounded inner child and my inner wounded child, they didn't match up well. I was never going to be good enough for um, where she was at in her life, and I can never outwork her problems, and she couldn't outwork my problems. Right, two-way street. I'm not right. I'm not going to sling mud from my side of the street. Right, in order to sling mud, you got to have some shit on your side of the street too. So why did I still do that? I don't know.
I mean, I can't speak for you, but I know when I was growing up, and obviously for some context, I know you know it, but maybe other people don't.
Mm.
My father ended his life at he was 36, I was 6. Um, so I know for a fact that my childhood, especially after 6, was was so I mean, I was obsessed with trying to prove myself to a man that didn't exist anymore. Trying to be good enough for a person that wasn't there anymore, and trying to build a relationship with a human being that was not no longer alive.
Mm.
Um, and so like the idea, I hear you talking about like I'm wanting to get friends, I'm trying to get friends, I'm bringing friends here and there. Um, I never had that feeling growing up. I never had that feeling as a kid. I got it as an adult, probably too late because I was so focused on the person, and I don't think they talk about. Not many people talk about this when you lose a parent at a young age. Um, the relationships outside of that parent fall apart. They're gone for all
Mm.
intents and purposes.
You mean like your what do you mean like the which relationship outside that parent?
Everybody, nobody else mattered to me.
Oh,
My
well, well.
after my dad died, everybody else was was less important than him. It was like it was almost as if other people didn't exist sometimes, right? Like my mom and my sister were the only two that for for most of the my like between probably 6 and 12, those were the only two people that I cared about. Everybody else was just like I didn't care. I was thinking so wholeheartedly about how could I do better for him? How could I impress him? How could I make him proud of me? And and for so long I was obsessed with that idea that I lost all sense of autonomy within myself. I didn't know who I was. At 6 years old, I lost that. I lost that privilege. I lost that opportunity. And from I would say probably the day I joined the military until 25, I was searching for that. And I thought, I joined the military. This is 100% factual, and I don't lie about it anymore. I did when I first joined because people would ask, but I joined because I just wanted to die. I didn't want to live anymore. But I made a pact after my dad died, that I would not commit suicide. I would not end my life by my own hand like he did. I wouldn't be my father was really the real words I used. And and so when I joined the military, I was exploring every opportunity I could to not be here anymore. Um, and that was the beginning of my social life, I think. I think the military really was the beginning of my social life because it forced me to. It forced me to have relationships with people at a level I had never had before. Even my friends before 18, in my high school years, like sure they were friends, but we didn't get close until after that. I didn't let anybody close until after that. And I was always looking at myself as never being good enough for the one person that I would never be able to be good enough for because they weren't here. That identity just absolutely overshadowed every opportunity for a healthy relationship outside of him. Whether people cared or not, it didn't really matter. I know for a fact how much my mom and my sister cared, but that did not matter to me. Never made it a bit of difference in how I thought about myself, and I wouldn't allow it because of how attached I was to the idea of, having a father that wasn't there anymore. And that was the beginning of all of my problems, of how I perceive the world and how I perceive myself. And it's really interesting to kind of compare and contrast your life or your journey through this kind of experience of suicide compared to mine. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember, like, my earliest recollection. I remember I was deer hunting when I was 13, 12, 13. I remember, I can tell you, I mean, I know exactly where it was. I was in a tree south of the river, right next to the stone bridge. So and I hunt the spot to this day. There's a river, there's a railroad bridge to the west, and there's a stone bridge to the east, and I was on the south side of the river. And facing the east. And I remember just, I got in trouble for something right before deer hunting, and which I did. I if I recall correctly, I think I didn't do homework, and then I borrowed somebody else's homework, and I got caught with my homework and their homework, and I was doing it during lunch. Right, we were a small Catholic school. It's difficult to get away with anything there, and I got in trouble often. I mean, I remember, like, we had behavior slips. They were pink. Like, a homework slip was blue and my behavior slips were pink reddish, whatever. And I didn't get a lot of homework slips. I, for the most part, did my homework in grade school. I got a lot more behavior slips than most. Like, I got more behavior slips than the rest of the class combined most years. Like, I was that kid. I just, right? And then maybe we'll get into that. Anyhow, I'm pretty sure it was that year I got a behavior slip right before deer hunting. And then my dad talked about not letting me deer hunting. It was my first year deer hunting, and I remember I was in a tree by myself with a loaded gun for the first time, like, in my life, and put the gun, like, underneath my chin, and, like, put my finger by the trigger, and I was like, oh, that's it. Like, I could get out of it, right? Like, that was the thought. It was like, wow, I mean, I was habitually getting in trouble. Most of what I got in trouble for wasn't malicious. It was, I was bored, or I was looking to get a rise out of people, or I was lazy. I wasn't overtly, there was things that did malicious. Like, I got caught stealing from Kmart and got smoking in my buddy's basement, right? There was all that kind of shit. But a lot of what I did wasn't malicious. I didn't go out of my way to fight or hurt people. Just did stupid shit, But I remember, like, I was, whatever, 12 or 13. If it was that same deer hunting season, I would have been 12, and thinking, okay, like, this solves all the problems. And then, in the same token, doesn't solve any problems, right? And it wasn't like I didn't have, like, this big epiphany. It was more or less like, wow, it is really that easy. I could right now, right? And I knew all the guns were in the house and the bullets. It wasn't like I couldn't have done it any other time, but it was like, wow, look how much power I have. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, growing up, it was like I kind of always respected guns, and whenever I had those ideations, it was like I would run away, like that, fight, flight, or freeze. I'm a flyer, which I argue in my book of the three is the best. Right? Because at least it builds time and distance between where you're at and the threat. Might not resolve it. You do build time and distance, and, cooler heads prevail kind of thing. But I often thought about just being done, and it didn't go away. It was always prevalent. And then once I joined the military, maybe it was something that was more comical or something. At least I could talk about it. Yeah. And not like talk about it in a healthy way, but talk about it in a, well, we'll probably die, right? I mean, we joked until we got to, like, I remember, like, flying back home from Iraq, and it was like, well, what are we going to do now? And it was like, well, I never planned on living, so I ought to start thinking about what I do when I go back home, right? And it's like you're like think about like the old movies, you know, and whatnot, where like the World War II stories, like I'm gonna marry that girl I've been talking to all these years, and right, it's like it wasn't quite that. It was like, oh, I suppose I'll go get, I went back to work for Black and Decker as a sales rep, and like, well, that sucked. It's like I was on an autopilot, you know. Um, I didn't resolve any of those issues. I didn't resolve the issues of being 12 to being 22, 23 in Iraq to the next major scare I had. I was 32, 33. It was when I got back from Gitmo, and I tried to expedite the grieving process through, you know, grieving the loss of a deployment, right, if you will. Getting home, right? Because, you know, there's a grieving process you go through after deployment, because you went from one life to now a different life, and I attempted to expedite that, and expedite a divorce, and expedite well, if I get engaged and, you know, get married again, that'll solve all my problems. That wasn't the truth. And there was a night there where I can't recall. I think it was saving up for the wedding, and my then fiance she had moved in with me and living with me. And it got to a point where we were arguing about something, and it was like there wasn't a resolution. She wanted so bad for a resolution because it was her anxiety was kicking in, and she wanted a resolution, and I want to be good enough for anybody and everybody, so that was kicking in. And I went to the bedroom, and I have a gun in the nightstand, and I went and I got it, and I came out by her, and I put it up against my head, and screaming and chambered around, and that was like it was, hey, I got two options here. You either accept me for who I am, or I ain't gonna fucking be here no more. And I was ready to go. And the look and the fear in her eyes, because it got to that point where I didn't see another way out. And then I'm getting like heated thinking about it, you know. It's like, and then I put the gun down. I dropped the magazine. I pulled it around of the chamber. I set it down, and I remember I just fell to fucking bits on the floor, because I'm like, I don't know what else to do anymore. I got pushed to that point. And even in this last relationship, when I broke up with her, it's like I could see myself going there again. I was so close to being that person that wasn't fucking good enough, and I realized it sooner, and I did something about it. I stood up for myself, and I brought it up to her, and I brought it up to her over and over and over, and I peeled back the layers, and I went to counseling, and I did all the things to it didn't resolve the I'm not good enough problem, but it did give me to understand that I need to work on me and not her and us, more over us. Right? And going back to that sometimes, always, never principle, it's like, well, shit, it's always a good idea to work on yourself. Right? It's sometimes a good idea to work on a relationship, and I'm making this statement now. It's never a good idea to work on somebody else's problems. Right? When you are their problem or they are your problem, right? Like, you can't outwork their problem. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a good idea to work with them on it. You can't outwork them on their problem.
Right.
There's no amount of work somebody can put around me to resolve this idea that I'm not good enough if I don't put the work in myself.
Yep.
You know, my mom can cry and worry about me and get upset, and my dad can sit down and teach me every fucking lesson he's ever learned, and every counselor can tell me everything. I can read every, you know, and people can tell me about every book they ever read, and it's like, well, that's for shit if I don't, you know, when, not even if, that's for shit when I don't put the work in myself. And now it's like, when I do think about suicide, I think about it in a weird past tense. I get triggers, I get twitchy, and then I think about how would I have, in the past, I would have gone right there and dwelled on it. And then now it's like, nope, I don't dwell on it. I work through it. So it's not like that. It's not there ever, right? It's not that it's not, you know, in my head, I have to work through it. You know, even, you know, I used to get up 3, 4, 5 times a night. I've never slept long. And now it's like, I had a nasal surgery done like 2 years ago now, and I eat better and I exercise and I'm doing all these things taking care of my physical health, and yet like last week I woke up in the middle of the night and had a complete fucking panic attack. Where am I? Why am I like kind of and 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 it's like I had to take a few minutes to reset my brain. Um, my ex got freaked out a few times because I would wake up in the middle of the night and like I had to go outside and walk the perimeter of the house and like like I had to clear the house.
Yep.
I had to look out every fucking window, and I had to walk the perimeter of the house. And I remember I told her one time, I go, I need to do this. She goes, you're freaking me out. I go, it was kind of like, hey, fuck off. Like I need to I need to do this for me because I'm being right. I mean, it's like otherwise I lay in bed and just have every worst case scenario, and then get into this panic attack, and then not really suicide here, but it's you spiral, right? Your brain is a real mother, right? You gotta work with it. Even going, the self sabotage. It's like there's a lot of things you can do in your head that aren't even close to fucking real, and your body doesn't know the difference. Your brain thinks that your body, the reality is it ain't fucking there.
Right. Right. It's not there on the outside, but it is there on the inside, and that means the body
100%.
the body needs to process through that feeling, right? Because that's essentially that's trauma, right? Like that's when the body is induced into something that is traumatic, it categorizes the emotions as being something to recognize as danger, right? So if you know if you see a bee, right? Some of the population is going to be like, it's just a bee, get over it. The other half of the population or some of the population is going to look at it and freak the fuck out because they're allergic to it, because they've been stung in the past, and the recognition of what that sting did to them is enough for them to have their body have this full bodily reaction that they cannot control in some regard, because this could kill them, right? And so it's in our situation, like we have to recognize when our body is saying this is dangerous, even if it doesn't make any logical sense. Then you have to sit with it and say, how can I process through it, right? For you, I love what you did, and it's something I've done too, is like you clear the house, right? Like, and I think one of the most beneficial pieces of that is when you're done, tell yourself you're done. I did it. I did a good job. Nothing's happened, right? Nothing's unsafe, right? And because what that does for you is it connects the logic to the processing, right? I did a good job. Your body recognizes that you just said that, and you feel that now, and that actually helps. That's things like neurolinguistic processing. That's somatic experiencing. Those are things that you are actually telling your body that you are processing trauma. You are doing a good job. You are overcoming this. You are surviving this. There are so many things that, again, these are the inherent problems that, if not dealt with, lead to things like suicide, lead to the result of suicide. And that's exactly what happened for me. Is like, I came home from my first deployment, and man, the opportunities to heal myself were there, but I didn't take any of them. Right? I came home from a deployment to Kunar province, Afghanistan, which is where at the time in 2012, where 3 out of the 4 medals of honor from Afghanistan conflict happened. That's where like Dakota Myers got his Medal of Honor, 2 miles away from where I was. Lone Survivor was just south of me, probably 2 or 3 miles. We drove by there a couple times. I mean, like all of those things, I was in that place, and I saw death. I saw injuries. I saw all of it. I never got shot at in a way that was like I could have died. There were things that happened to me. I almost got electrocuted, driving around a fucking courtyard. I almost got landed on by a helicopter while doing a sling load. Like there were things that happened that I just like brushed off. But I saw people die, and that's, you don't forget that. And how do you process that is such a profound question, along with everything that happened to me before that. And I just remember coming home, and for the first few nights, 'cause I was only home for about 2 weeks, and then I had to go back to Fort Knox because I tore my ACL. For the first few nights, I didn't sleep. I still remember just literally, at first, I would lay down. I'd be like, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to try to go to sleep. But because in Afghanistan, I only slept for about 45 minutes to an hour anyways, I would just end up sitting up in bed and just in the dark, looking, ominously into the darkness, even though I could, my night vision is like, I could see fucking everything. I remember opening up because I lived in the basement at the time, opening up my door, walking around the first floor, and then going back to my room. And I'd do that every once in a while. I'd go to the bathroom, I'd walk around, just make sure everything's clear. But I was never comfortable when I got home. And then, tore my ACL, and that was just add insult to injury. It was just another level of discomfort that I had to then face. And that was a question of, it became a question of my identity, because a torn ACL to me was like, I'm going to lose everything I've built in the military. The only thing I felt like was keeping me alive, because somehow I survived Afghanistan, even though I didn't expect it to. Everything that was keeping me alive was about to be undone, because some dude put me in a heel hook without even considering the fact that my knee can't move that way. And 3 days after I got home from Afghanistan. And so like all of these feelings and thoughts were going through my head, thinking like I'm done. And I get to Fort Knox, and I'm co-located with guys that got blown up. My roommate got blown up in a Husky 40 feet up a mountain from a what was it, 150-pound IED, right? Like, to me, I'm looking at myself and thinking like, I do not deserve to be here. Right. I don't deserve to be in a place where like real heroes are sitting right next to me, recovering from wounds that like some random fuck from outside our Brazilian jiu-jitsu shop came in and tore my fucking ACL. This guy got blown up in a Husky and may never walk again because he broke his back, broke his legs, has severe TBIs, all that stuff. Like the profound sense of like littleness that I felt was only enhanced by the environment and the situation that I was in. And I just remember, I remember the one person I met that actually talked to me there. He lived in Kentucky and lived right outside of Fort Knox, and we hung out for a little bit. And then I remember one day he took me to a gun shop, and I remember I was like, I'm gonna buy a gun. And I had no idea that you can't buy a gun from out of state, like you just can't. And I remember thinking like, that'll be easy. That'll be what I do. And thank God for that, because they said, oh, hey, you're from Wisconsin, you can't buy a gun here. And I'm like, then I just like, I sat with that. Like that was the first month I sat with that for the 7 months I was there. And I know if I would have had access to a gun or been allowed to have a gun on base, I wouldn't be here. I can guarantee you. The 7 months I spent in Fort Knox were the worst of my life. They were the lowest. They were I probably slept 30 minutes to an hour a day max. I was in pain constantly. It was my first ACL, so it was just the worst. It was you think it's hard to grieve from a deployment. It's even harder to grieve from an injury after a deployment, because you don't know if you'll ever be able to meet the standards of the team again, right? And it's just the tenacity that I had to dig into to get through that injury was, I look back on it as remarkable. I feel I'm proud of myself, and also a little like scared of like how the fuck did I do that at times, because there were times I'd pick up a knife and I'd think about like, yeah, maybe I could do that, right? Like any option was becoming a more favorable option the longer I was there, until I recognized like, hey, I've got to do something about this. I have to get out of here. Like I recognized that this place was bad for me, not because the place, but because of what I was doing to myself. And so at some point, it was probably after my surgery, when I was starting to go to PT, I was like, you got to do something, right? And so I remember pulling this quote from what Batman Begins, I think, putting it on my mirror, repeating it to myself every day, and just starting to think like, okay, if I can just put an idea of getting out of here in my head, maybe that'll help. And it worked, right? I was lucky that was what kicked me into gear. I started doing push-ups every day. I started, trying to do sit-ups, flutter kicks, anything that I could do to enhance my body and just distract me, honestly. I started visiting home more, and just trying to get myself in a place where I wasn't thinking about the problem. I was trying to work the problem, right? Because I think there's a profound difference between thinking about the problem and obsessing about the problem, and actually working the problem in small steps, and dividing it up into, taking one bite at a time and actually chewing it. And it got me through, but it didn't solve the problems, right? The suicidal ideation was still there. The trauma was still there, unprocessed. The grief was still there. All the things that still created the result of what suicide would eventually be for me were still there, but I made it through that moment. Thankfully, because I almost didn't. I think a law made it so I didn't. Can't buy firearms out of state.
It worked. Yeah. What was the Batman? What was the quote from Batman Returns, or Batman Returns, or Batman Begins?
Batman Begins.
So the Christian Bale one.
Yep. I gotta find it because I couldn't remember it.
No, please, because that's you got to work the problem, and often you got to start by working the symptom, and eventually you'll realize, right? In working the symptom, you'll discover the problem. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, dwelling on it gets you nowhere.
Yep. So the quote was, and this was said by Liam Neeson in Batman Begins: "If you devote yourself to an ideal, they can't stop you, and you become something else entirely, a legend." Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like back then, I don't really know what I was thinking, why that made sense to me. Now I kind of look at it as the ideal part was for me, and the "they can't stop you" part was stop looking at other people's opinions. And I think because I know for a fact I wasn't looking at it from that kind of depth. But now I recognize like the necessity of that quote was telling me, stop doing this for your dad. Stop looking at it like he's gonna be proud of you or something like that, and start doing it. Start devoting yourself to something that matters to you. And that's like that. I know, was the first real opportunity for me to look at myself as an autonomous human being, separate from the identity that I had built for my dad specifically. And then 2015 would be the ultimate kind of breaking point where I knew I had to change that for sure. Because 2015 was March of 2015 was the time I put my Glock 34 to my head. And I mean, you've shot my Glock 34, haven't you? Didn't I?
Yep.
Didn't I bring that?
Yep.
And you remember
Yeah.
how surprising that trigger was, right?
Oh yeah.
I don't know how I didn't pull it. That's, I mean, I don't know how it didn't go off, but it was as close as I could possibly get. And then I remember just letting go and putting the gun down, and here I am, right? And I think this is it. You know, you can't really see it if you're listening to the podcast, but I've kept the round because I won't. You know, this is my totem to, you know, I feel like this is my totem from inception to remind me I'm actually in reality, that my reality is from this point on, no matter how hard life gets, I'm always gonna live it. I'm always gonna give myself the opportunity to overcome it, get through it, survive it, and live it. Because the beauty that I can find is more important than the pain that will come from it. Because I have that ability to find beauty. I always have. I just need to use it.
Yeah, you know, in life, often it's in reflection that we realize the peaks and valleys of our lives, and you know that is your mountaintop. Some may say that's the lowest point. No, it's the highest point, from my perspective, because I look at life differently, right? I look at, I go with this adage. It's endure the hustle, embrace the struggle, enjoy the grind. You know, the hustle is when you're on this upward trajectory of where you think you want to go. You were on this upward trajectory of your mountaintop at the time was, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
If you know, if the war doesn't kill me, I'll do it myself, right? That was your mountaintop. And often what ends up happening, you get so close, or that old adage, it takes, you know, 50% of the time to do the first 90%, and then 50% of the time to do the last 10%, right? And when you're climbing the mountain, you don't know what's at the peak. You don't know the lesson learned. It's only when you start coming down, right? And then that's the embrace the struggle, right? We talk in the military, we embrace the suck. Well, there's t-shirts, right? We love to embrace the suck. And it's like, in that moment, like you said, you had your Glock 34 and you said you don't even know how or why it didn't happen. Well, it didn't. That was the mountaintop. That's the mountain you had to get over. And then as soon as you say, okay, hold on, I have this ability to find the good, to see the beauty. You get that mountaintop and that peak of understanding, and then you can see so much clearer. And in the grind, that's the step down, walking down the mountain, and that's where a lot of people forget. You know, I use the word grind intentionally. A lot of people are like, oh, grind, just gotta grind it out every day. It's like, no, there is a lot of bullshit every day. Do you enjoy it? Because you got to. Because you hustle to get there, you struggle to get over the mountaintop, and now it's like in your case, it's like, well, shit, if you don't enjoy the grind, you don't enjoy the opportunity you have to be alive, well, fuck. What the hell did you go through that for? What'd you go through the ACL surgery and the PT and the 7 months of isolation? What did you go through that moment in time when you were so close to being done? You better fucking enjoy the rest of the time you got on this earth. Like, that's the moment. And you know, I think now that mountaintop I overcame with my ex, where I was in that moment and I said I wasn't good enough. It's like, well, fuck, I made it through that struggle. Absolutely. And looking back on it, it was like, I was pretty heightened. You know, just a few minutes ago talking about it, like I could feel my, you know, I was getting hot. I was getting warm thinking about it, reliving that moment, right? The trauma is real. Like you said, it's within me. And I know that in my last relationship, it didn't get to that point. right? It got close, right? I felt not good enough often in that relationship, and it got to the point where I had the ideations. It got to the point where it's funny you bring up a knife. It's like I still have I have homicidal and suicidal ideations when I have knives in my hand sometimes, right? I'm never lashed out in violence, and it's not because I'm not capable. It's because I haven't. Um, and I was in a situation like that. I was in a situation with an ex that got hands on with me, and it's like, fuck, I could have fucking ended it, right? And I never even gone down that road, because what was planted in me very early on in my life with my dad is you never put your hands on a woman. Never. There's never a time, never once, right? And he always said, you think about every woman. Your grandmother's a woman. I love my grandmother. She's the most important person in my life. And you never put your hands on her. You never put your hands on your mom. And don't put your hands on any other woman. So it's like that's never happened, But well, fuck, I can off myself. That's pretty fucking simple. That's kind of noble, right? In a fucked up way. It's like, oh, I'm the fucking problem. I'm the biggest issue you have in your life. I'm never going to be good enough. Your standard, oh, well, fuck you. If I'm not there, then, problem solved. Right. Like, and that's even this last relationship. I struggle, right? This idea of not being good enough. I struggle being accepted by people that I want to be accepted by. And it's like, even in that, it's like, I told her that I had, up until the point I broke up with her, I was really struggling, because it's like, well, fuck, I can never get to that peak of that mountain. It's like, well, fuck, I was climbing the wrong goddamn mountain. I needed to climb the mountain and endure the hustle of working on myself, because when I worked on myself and I got to that struggle point, I realized it matters not what she thinks. And you know what? If she can't accept me for who I am when I'm working on myself, well, fuck, I'm going to change my damn audience. And that was the mountaintop. I didn't have to climb her fucking mountain and be good enough for her and her people and her family. And I had to be good enough for me, and I had to be good at being good enough for me.
Yeah.
I had to be content with that. And otherwise it led me down that path. And I told her that. It got, when it started getting to the point where I was starting to doubt myself, when I was having suicidal ideations again, that was a me problem, not a her problem. It was a me problem. And so I did a me solution, which was I walked away. And it doesn't mean that I don't experience pain and loss and guilt and frustration. It's like, no, I experience all that shit, and I own it. It happened for me. It was a present. It didn't happen to me. It was not a punishment. It was a present. It happened to me. And what was the lesson learned? Or not for me, correction, right? It was a present that happened for me. What was the lesson that I learned in that relation? Well, I learned that I got work to do on myself still. I learned that I am good enough. I'm good enough for me. And it's important that I surround myself with people that find me good enough. And if I'm not good enough, then I got work to do. And that's good. And it's got to be work that I want to do. It's got to be in areas that I see a deficiency, not where others see a deficiency. Because I put a lot of work into areas that other people saw a deficiency. And that's fine, right? Until it got to a point where people saw deficiencies in areas I didn't see deficiencies. I'm pretty honest. I mean, here we are. You and I, we're not very close friends. We don't know each other that well. And I said, hey, let's have a fucking podcast and tell the world our secrets. And it was like, okay, that seems like a good idea. Right? So it's like, well, you put me in a room with people that are, let's say the openness scale is 0 to 100. I'm probably in the 90th percentile, if not 99, right? I'll make that argument, And you put me in a room with a bunch of people that are fucking conveniently Catholic and, under 10% agree or openness. Well, fuck. It's probably not going to work out. I think there's this little thing say the truth shall set you free. Pretty sure it's in the Bible. Mark, I believe so, right? It's like, I came to the realization in that particular situation, and this is true in life. It's like, there's a line in Finding Forrester. I love that movie. It's not a great movie. I still love it. Sean Connery, and it escapes me, the young gentleman. He's old now because the movie came out 15 years ago or so. And anyways, towards the end of the movie, when the protagonist, the young gentleman who's ultimately becomes the hero in the story, he's talking to Sean Connery's character, who's William Forrester, and he says, honesty isn't high on your people's priority list. That's a good line right there, and that's the line I used with her in particular, and her family and her friends. It's like honesty wasn't a priority, and it's like, well, shit, for me and my lack of agreeableness and my high openness, well, honesty is a very high priority to me.
Mhm.
And as soon as you wanted me to start lying or withholding the truth, that doesn't work for me. And I love Jordan Peterson, 12 rules for life, right? He says always tell the truth, or at the very least, don't lie.
Mhm.
And as soon as you start giving a shit about your image and my image and how people think about me, and I have to cater to your insecurities, well, then I started writing. I said all the time, don't fucking don't censor me. Don't take my ability to speak freely, because it's my ability to speak freely that got me here in the fucking first place. It's like I've said it since I was fucking in second grade in some way, shape, or form. It's like my mouth writes a lot of goddamn checks and my ass has to cash them eventually. And I'm good with that.
Mhm.
And I put myself out there. I had a TEDx I put out in October of 2019, and I put myself out there, and I ended up getting accused by other veterans of plagiarizing. And it got taken down, and you know what? That was a real motherfucker. That really hurt. I talk about times where I was really low and suicidal. Well, that was fucking one of them. It's like I thought I was on I thought I was on this mountaintop. I thought I was on this peak of, man, you're gonna be a fucking keynote speaker, international known, and all this fucking shit. And it's like, no, you ain't made it yet. That was the fucking mountaintop I had to get through, and I didn't know it. Right? You don't, kind of like you with the Glock 34. It's like, well, you were on the wrong fucking. You didn't know what. You were on the wrong mountaintop. You didn't know what mountaintop you were on. And it wasn't until you got on the peak and you looked out and you saw, okay, oh shit, all right, this is what I'm up against. And I use these sayings like the hustle, struggle, grind, and these things because that's the way I understand the world. The world doesn't come very natural to me like it does to most, and in interpersonal relationships. So I see it, and I spend a lot of time reflecting, and I spent so much time for so many years thinking, what do I need to do different so people accept me? No, what do I need to do different so I'm a better person? And then you put your ass out there, you leave it on the goddamn field, and people are either going to accept you or they ain't. And you know what? That's a fucking them problem. I say it to people all the time. That's a you problem. And I say it with pride and distinction. It's a you problem. If I have problems, I'll fix them. You can point them out and I'll acknowledge them and I will work on them if it's truly a me problem.
How do you specifically differentiate that? Right. If I were to tell you,
A you problem?
like if I were to tell you, Andy, I have this problem with you.
Tell me your problem.
Now,
Like let's war game it right now. You know me for a bit. Tell me what's your problem.
I struggle to find problems in people. I'm
I got no issue. That's one of my strengths. I tell you what's fucked up with you.
Yeah. What's interesting. I've noticed this more in my work.
Yeah.
I struggle to look for problems in people. I see so much potential in people that I just don't.
Oh.
I don't bother.
I'm not. Oh my God. I live the negativity bias. I'm an operations guy. So my first thing is to figure out what's fucked and figure out how do I unfuck it. That's like, okay, like oh no, let me do it. I'll tell you your fucking problems. I'll tell you that much. No, that's fucking interesting to me. No, so this is the way I differentiate it. Here again, everything I do in life is simple, right? If someone comes to me and says, "Hey Andy, you need to fix this or fix that," right? Is it right? One of three things. And this is Simon Sinek. Start with why. Start with the why in mind. That's where I've learned this, right? We got to break it down to three things. When people have a problem with you, it is one of three things. It's a why, it's a how, or it's a what. Okay? Your why drives your what, and your how executes it, right? And I did this speech years ago where I took Simon Sinek's initial theory of how conversations typically go, and often, you have the why, the how, the what. And I've done a little bit on it, right? This is what it comes down to. When people challenge me on what I do, I say, okay, well, what is it? What is it? Because often there's a disagreeable point there. It's like, well, this is what I do. This is what you do. Okay. Well, I might not listen to the what. Okay, let's talk about the how. Okay, well, this is how you do it, Andy. Okay, well, maybe there's some opportunity to growth here. And then when you challenge my why, now you're poking the bear, right? Because now you're attacking my values and beliefs. And between the why, the how, the what, All three of them are flexible. You ought to come with a pretty good fucking argument. So, for example, this is an argument I had with my ex that I was willing to die on this hill, even though it wasn't a hill I was willing to fight on, right? So she made the argument in the past, for example, she said, because I was being on time is not a priority to me. It's not, right? And I'm writing my second book now. I started writing it this weekend because it's the chapter. It's the second part to Words Fucking Matter. So I wrote it on my whiteboard with my expo because that's where my brain goes. It's called the book. The working title right now is "Things I Say to Win the Day." Because a lot of people say you have these phrases or these sayings, and it's like, well, yeah, that's what gets me through the day is all these phrases and these sayings to help me understand it, right? So it's one of the things I say is I show up exactly when I arrive. And it's a little play on words from Lord of the Rings when Gandalf. There you go, right? Okay, so that's what it's a little play on words there, right? He says wizards arrive always on time, right? It's like whatever time they arrive is the right time. Mm-hmm. And so I say that, right? Okay, so you like that's why it's funny. That's the next book. It's like this is what I say, this is where I got it from, but this is the depth behind it. And what it says is I always show up when I arrive because there's plenty of people that can show up on time and they arrive on time and they never show up. Because they never put themselves out there. So this is the argument her and I had. She would say, when you show up late, or when you show up not wearing nice clothes, or disheveled, or wrinkled, or dirty, right? It means you don't care. And I say, when I show up, it means I care. Doesn't matter when I show up or how I show up. The fact that I showed up means that I care. And this is an argument I had with her. And then this is the depth it came down to, right? She lived in a world that was very controlled, and her parents had money, and they had nice clothes, and it was logical, and it was, I came from a world of chaos where we didn't have nice things, and my cousins wore nice clothes, and I wore their hand-me-downs, and my dad was always running late because he's a small business owner, and your customers come first, and your business, comes before your family, and that's because without money, then you don't have the next thing, So it's like this is the trickle-down effect, So I come from the school, well, if you show up, and that's all that fucking matters. And when you show up and how you show up, how you look, I should say, right? What you're wearing, going back to the what you're wearing is so insignificant. Mm-hmm. What matters is that you showed up. Yeah. And so if someone came to me and says, like she would say, right, well, you showed up late, so it doesn't mean you care. Well, you got two fucking choices then. I either show up late or I don't show up at all. Those are your fucking options. What would you rather have? Oh, show up, late? Okay, well, then that's what we're going to fucking accept, and let's move on with our lives. So that's the kind of stuff that irritates me or attacks me, where it's like, you got to be able to articulate it. And in your world, yeah, you had this perfection. I don't have perfection, and I don't enjoy perfection. That's not interesting. I've got this happened a couple of 6 months ago. I was going to a baseball game for the Savannah Bananas. If you ever see the Savannah Bananas, they do not endorse this show. I highly plug them. They're coming to Milwaukee in September. They're playing in the Milkman Stadium. Shameless plug for the Savannah Bananas. Anyways, I was going to a game. They were playing in Kansas City. I had thought all week they were playing in St. Louis. That's how much I didn't pay attention. I just knew I was getting on a plane to go see a baseball game on a Friday afternoon. So I was Friday night, yeah. So I'm on the plane Friday morning, and so another woman texts me. She said, "Hey, are you flying in?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "What time?" I said, "That time." She goes, "Oh, let's share an Uber together. What hotel are you staying at?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. Let me check." In my email, nothing. I called my virtual assistant, Emmy, and I was like, "Hey, Emmy, what hotel am I staying at tonight?" She goes, "You never told me to book your hotel." I go, "Sounds accurate." So I texted the woman back. I said, "I don't have a hotel. Where are you staying?" And she's like, "Whatever, Radisson or some shit." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then she goes, "Wait, you're meaning to tell me that you were on a plane ready to fly to Kansas City? You thought it was St. Louis the whole time. You didn't have a hotel room." I'm like, "Yeah, I was on the plane, right? Like I did the next step like that, and I'll figure it out when I get there." And okay, like. Worst case scenario, they're completely sold out, and I gotta sleep on someone's couch. Well, that ain't so bad. That ain't worse, right? Okay, shape. Like, let's fucking go. It's like with me, like that's part. The planning part is part of the adventure. So you again, like if you come to me and say, "Andy, you need to show up on time in the right uniform and act the right way," well, no, I need to show up. Scene. I'll fucking show up, and I'll figure it out from there, and that's interesting to me. Right? So they're very, very simple. It's not, right? And that's the depth I go. Because if you're going to come at me and tell me that the way I live is inconsistent with your expectations, your values, your beliefs, you have opened up Pandora's box for me to explain to you my expectations, my values, my beliefs of myself. And what ended up happening, and what ends up happening when I am self-sabotaging is I start to mimic the behavior or values or beliefs of other people to be good enough for them. But you know what? Fuck them. It's my goddamn mountain, right? The book itself, I keep looking at it, right? The mountain is you. In the very end, it says that. You are the fucking mountain. You have to climb your mountain. You have to be the victor of your story, right? And this. I'm going to read the very last part of this book because I forgot what it said, but I remember it was profound, right? It says this. It says, okay, now that you've learned all this shit, okay, your life is now beginning. That doesn't say, now you've learned all this shit. I'm ad-libbing the first 238 pages. We're on page 239. You're welcome, America. Your life is just beginning. One day the mountain that was in front of you will be so far behind you, it will barely be visible in the distance. But who you became and the learning to climb it, that will stay with you forever. That is the point of the mountain. It's like, well, fuck, you got to climb the son of a bitch, right? And it's still back there. And you got to fucking climb it, and you got to be good with it. And you don't have to explain shit to anybody else. You have to understand it and know within yourself, right? It's seek first to understand before being understood. When you understand you, okay, I understand me. Well, that's a pretty good fucking starting point. Now I can understand others and the world around me. First, I have to understand me. Because that chip on my shoulder, the mountain in my background, the boots I fucking carry, the things, or the boots I wear, the things they carry, great Vietnam book, the things they carried. It's like, this a motherfucker too. It was a fiction story. I really wanted that story to be true. The things they carried, great book. One of the few books I read. I read that one in Iraq. Anyhow, it's like, well, that I carry that with me every day, all day, right? In a master resilience training in the Army, we talk about it as an iceberg. People only see the top of the iceberg, the conscious, right? Well, there's all this shit in the subconscious. And the more you're willing to understand your own self-conscious, the more you're willing to share it with others, the better your life will be. And that's the key, right? We started this conversation talking about suicide. Life is a fucking contact sport. Suicide is an individual piece of this contact sport that is life. You're responsible for it. You're responsible for understanding yourself. You're responsible for seeking help. You're responsible for being vulnerable in those moments to absolutely learn. You're responsible to take care of your own life and not take your life. That's what I didn't understand for a lot of years. I thought that I was solving other people's problems. I thought that if killing myself was the resolution for other people's issues, I considered them above me. And once I realized, no, this is you, and you got to work on you, right? You can't just walk around the world and say, hey, world, this is me, and fuck you, here I stand, and take me if I am. Well, no, the world's gonna slap you in the face quick, fast, and hurry, right? You got to say, hey, world, this is who I am, and I'm willing to learn and listen. And be vulnerable along the way. I'm not going to get away from who I am. The mountain is still in my background, right? I'm not going to get away from that. I'm willing to learn and adapt and evolve over time because I very much don't believe in the word change. And there's studies on this too. It's like the more exposure you have to stress in your life, it awakens parts of your brain that were dormant. You don't change, you evolve. You literally, there's parts and pieces of your DNA and you know the generations before you where you start opening up parts of your brain. It's like a computer that learns as it goes, right? It just access more and more and more files, and you have to expose yourself to stress and pressure to access those files. So it's not that you change. You are who you are. You were born that way. Through nature, you open up more files, and then the true you comes to life, you know? It's like a goddamn butterfly coming out of a cocoon. It's like you gotta go through some shit to fucking spread your wings and show your true beauty, because your beauty is within you. You have to choose to let it out.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, one of the things that I found after my mountain, we'll go with that analogy. Um, I learned to connect with nature a lot differently than I did before. You know, I've obviously always been infantry, and so I had a pretty good connection with nature. You know, always being in the woods and always having a ruck march and all that, do that crap that infantry, you don't want to do, but you also do want to do, so you can tell other people that you're better than them. Um,
Not
um,
wrong.
because that's just how the infantry culture is. But when after after 2015, I went deeply internal and deeply reflective on my past and everything that I had been through, and really took a look at things like values, specifically things like trauma, things like grief, all of the emotions that I had never processed and never went through, and categorically tried to understand them. And I think you're 100% right, because what I was noticing is one of the reasons I don't have problems with people or go looking for problems with people is because what works for me now is because I've spent so much time internally reflecting about my own problems with myself and adapting them, and growing through them and processing them, is it makes it so much easier to just understand why people are the way that they are. And I and I don't even bother having the perspective of saying, Andy, I have a problem with you. I might say, hey, this made me feel this way. But to me, it's not a problem. It's I recognize why you do the things that you do, and so it makes it so much easier for me to accept people for who they are. And if I don't like the person that they fundamentally are, I just don't talk to them. I
Yeah.
don't bother telling them that they have a problem, because that usually doesn't help any situation, unless it's uh, well, business is probably a really good one, because you say, hey, like, we need to do this. Here's the issue, right? But then it's the business's problem. It's not, hey, you, Andy, you show up late, so I have a huge problem with you, right? Like, no, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, if we have this meeting, if it's important, they like it when we show up on time, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Transactional.
it's
Yeah.
so it's, to me, it's, I've become so adept at understanding people by understanding myself, that I recognize when I do that too much. And so I do things like I did this weekend. I went camping. Uh, but I like to do really crazy stuff, like go cold weather camping. So we went up to
It's terrible.
Hayward, Wisconsin. Uh, and I don't even care at this point what the challenge is, because I'm just prepared for it. So I'm thinking, like, you know what? It's probably going to be like southern Wisconsin, where there's no snow outside, is relatively beautiful weather. Uh, we get up there, and it's Hayward, and it's 4 feet of snow in the woods, and we have a tent that you have to put on the ground, and so we literally had to dig a 2 foot a 2 foot deep and 2 foot wide trail to get to the campsite, which is about 15 yards, and then a 20-foot circle all the way down to the ground. And we dug 20, a, a 20-foot diameter circle, of 4 foot of snow, put this tent in, set up the tent, slept in it in 20-degree weather, which was, to me, it was great, because one of the biggest challenges I've ever had was, uh, me and a friend of mine did a negative 35-degree overnight in a shelter we had to build. Right, and the only thing we could use was a poncho. And so we built basically an igloo, with a poncho over it, just to keep the snow out. So when I do stuff like that, and then I'm obviously still recovering from my latest ACL reconstruction, and I walked 3 miles in snowshoes and 4 feet of snow, sinking in 2 feet sometimes, and trying to unfuck my surgery knee, just like not having the power to do that. Like, it reminds me of the mountain when I do
Hmm.
that. And that's what I recognize, like, through this conversation, and also like over the weekend. Yeah, I always do it with a friend. I'll do it alone, just because, sometimes it's nice to remind myself I can do it alone. But I prefer to do it with one of my best friends, because it reminds me, this guy was there, through those mountains, right?
Yeah.
And for me, like a lot of sometimes it's not a mountain, it's a fucking mountain range, right? Like I climb the fucking Himalayas, right? Like Alexander the Great. It's like I look at the people that do these things with me, and I remember saying to my friend Carrie this over the weekend, because we talk about stuff like this all the time. And I told him like flat out, I'm like, I think you underestimate the impact and the value you had on my life. And to connect with a person like that in nature, and like we were 20 miles from the nearest person, probably in the middle of the woods, and literally surrounded by 4 feet of snow. Like our heads were laying below the level of the snow in the tent, right? That's the funny part. Is like if you were to just move the tent, you wouldn't see us. Um, like to recognize where you are, having a conversation like that. It, him and I were the only two people that existed in that
Hmm.
moment, right? And to be able to connect in that moment, like it's that is something that only after 25 was I able to really develop, because we talked about it. Like after that, he was like, he said to me, he's like, I was also struggling, and honestly I was using you to help me in the same way. And I was like, mutual, right? It was absolutely mutual for both of us to be helping each other through that. And that's why our relationship now is so much better than other people who have best friends, right? Like we have a dramatically intense and deep connection the second we talk. Not we warm it up, or we don't talk about anything. Like we have no fear in having deep conversations about very hard stuff about ourselves, and that only existed because of us both, kind of climbing our mountains together without really recognizing that we were helping each other out. Like I think we knew, I think subconsciously we both knew that we were both struggling, obviously, but
Yeah.
we didn't really put a lot of conscious thought into like you are my support structure right now, and I am yours. Like it was just like we were living and breathing and surviving, and then only after in reflection have we been able to look at it and say, uh, yeah, we did that together. We overcame that together. We crossed those mountains and traversed those mountains together. And I love going out in the middle of winter, right? And trout, trekking through 3-4 feet of snow just to look at some trail cams, and just to be close to good people, right? Like it's a remarkable moment for us to just endure and remind ourselves like what it feels like to push yourself and feel your way through a situation with the person that also has been there with you. And that's, to me, that's remarkable beauty.
Well, and that's, you know, in the theme of, talking suicide here, that's the key, that you find people near you that can work with you while you work on yourself, and then you have these joint shared experiences. That's one of the struggles that we have had as veterans, as you come home and you feel isolated, you feel alone because you're no longer with the people that you had been with, and the fact that you are intentional about it, right? You intentionally put yourself in these places and these moments that are going to be high stress. We talk about, that opens up different areas, and you do it. Sometimes, like you said, sometimes you do it alone, and often you do it with somebody else, because it's a way to work through a lot of things internally and externally, and do it in a safe and controlled environment. Right? It's don't wait till you're at your breaking point to say, oh, I ought to start working on some shit. I'm much more slow and methodical. You're not gonna get my ass out doing camping. You're certainly not gonna get me camping in the fucking snow. That ain't happening, right? And I'm just not. and I work on things on my own. I know that when I talk about smashing volleyballs, right? Like I play volleyball a couple days a week, and that's my way to let out some aggression, right? And it's like I'm cooped up in an office often, It's like that's my way of working shit out. And um, my volleyball friends are probably the most consistent friends I have, and I've never, not even friends, they're associates at best. Like I've never hung out with them outside of volleyball. And that's fine. Like that's I have 1,000 acquaintances, and that works for me, And it's like those are the things that I do on a consistent basis. I knew that, or I know that when I don't play volleyball, I don't feel as good as a human, right? So the key here when it comes to the struggles you go through in life's going to punch you in the face. That's the reality, and life's going to be a struggle. The key is for you as an individual, veteran, family member, whoever you may be, to get out proactively, be self-aware of what works, self-regulate, and then self-reflect and adjust as needed, right? A little Kentucky windage goes a long way. And so we started this conversation about suicide, and we went a few different places. Um and you know and we ended on a good note here. We're ending on a optimistic and hopeful note. And that's the point of this podcast, is that I don't want to sit here and have a suicide prevention class and yet talk about suicide, right? I want to have real conversations, and it's important to me because for me this is part of my journey, and not even healing journey. It's part of my journey. Part of my journey is surround myself with people and have conversations, and continue to push myself in the level of how comfortable am I sharing my perspective with the world. There's 8 billion perspectives on this planet, and I know mine, and that's the one I want to share with the world. I want to continue to push myself as a person, as a more open and honest I am, the more it allows people to be unapologetically themselves. That's my top takeaway from today's podcast session, whatever we call these things. What's your top takeaway there, Dylan?
The mountain is you, right? We'll go with your
Mountain is you.
We'll go with your book, but I mean, I like to always remind people when we're talking about suicide that suicide is the result, and so don't get caught up looking at the result. Don't think the problem is the actual result, and look at what built it. Look at what crafted it and molded it and created it, and dig into it with courage, because that's what you need. Like if you're going to approach a problem as profound as suicide, you're going to need some courage, and you might need some help too, right? Like I didn't look for help, and I was able to do it, but that doesn't mean it was the right way for me to do it, right? Like I have no doubt that there was probably a better way that I could have went about working through my problems. But if you're insistent on doing it yourself, you can at least bring in other people's perspectives in a way that doesn't feel like they're attacking you, right? Read a book, listen to a podcast. If you're listening to this, you're bringing in someone else's perspective right now by listening to me. And so analyze and be honest with yourself, just like Andy likes to be honest with everything he says. Be honest with yourself about who you are, what you've had to do, and how you've lived your life, and be okay with not being not being the person you've wanted to be. It's okay, right? Like sometimes you gotta fucking survive getting over the mountain to then be at the peak level of who you want to become. But either way, just get through, right? Like I can tell you right now, when I was contemplating pulling a trigger 8 years ago, I swore off that I would probably never have someone that would understand me, a partner that could understand me, love me, appreciate me for who I was. I swore off having children because I was like, how could I possibly take care of someone when I can't even take care of myself? I swore off being any kind of leader or, beneficiary of or impactful person in the world. And now I'm here, right? Like, and I laugh because it's just like, it's so crazy to think that I have this amazing woman that supports me, loves me, and often guides me through this thing called life, that has given me a stepson that is amazing, and just an incredible young man that's going to do incredible things. And then she's given me this little baby girl that I never thought I would have. And then I'm here with Andy, impacting people. I've written a book. I've, impacted over, a couple million people on TikTok. I never would have imagined myself being where I am, but I can guarantee you that I did it for me. Like this entire journey from 2015 to here has been my gift to myself, and everything that comes from here on out will be, again, my gift to myself and my gift to the world, that I can show people you can survive, and you can also thrive. So that's what that's my takeaway.
Yeah, no, it's about thriving, not only surviving. No, and that never say never, right? You don't know what the mountain is. You don't know what your mountains are going to be. It's important that you take one step, put it in front of the other. For everybody out there, right? There's a national suicide line. I know here in Wisconsin we have 988. Find somebody, call somebody. You can call me, 414-793-6253. That's how dead serious I am on this topic. There's never a time that you don't have people that are going to support you. Myself and Dylan, we're here to support you at all times. So remember, suicide, like Dylan has talked about, suicide's not the problem, and it's not the solution. And so let's take the time to dig into what is the problem and what are some viable solutions. If you haven't heard it recently, I'm going to say it to you at all. I love you. Welcome home.